Alex, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Nick, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you, man. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, I think we'll have a good time today. So the one question I always ask at the beginning of every podcast I do is I'm about to ask it here in a second, but the reason I ask it is because I think it sets up the value proposition for the audience really well. So, like I've noticed sometimes when I listen to certain podcasts and I don't recognize the guest, I have to do some digging beforehand to figure out like, okay, who is this person? Like if someone's just clicked on this and they're like, I don't know who Alex Day is, I'm not familiar with any of his work. I don't know what kind of vibe he brings. And so the question I typically like to ask at the beginning of every podcast is if someone's clicked on this and they have no idea who you are or what you talk about or what you stand for, why do you think they should stick around and listen to what you have to say?
That's a great question. I would say my story is pretty relatable. I'm someone who always wanted to be working in sports, being on air. And I really made it happen myself doing content creation, started during COVID and have turned into a career being one of the bigger voices talking about sports in New York. So it's a self-made story, and I feel like we can all relate to that.
So you use the word relatable in your answer. And when I hear that word, I think of authenticity. And when I think of authenticity, I think about this push across the sphere of content creation. And the word that I feel like is always used is, be authentic. A lot of people's advice for anyone who's starting out in the world of content creation is be authentic, be yourself. What does that actually mean? Can you help me understand, like, what does it actually mean to be authentic and to bring your true self to the content that you make?
I think it's a feeling. Like for me, I think it's always been much harder to be someone else than myself. And don't get me wrong, there are times where maybe I wish I said something differently or did something differently. Um, but I feel like my audience appreciates how genuine I am, for better or worse, where they feel like they know me. I don't really even open up that much on a personal side, but I really just inject my personality in a way that is consistent, and it's been consistent over a long period of time, and things that I believe in or am passionate about, the audience has gotten to know me in that kind of way. So I think when you're talking about authenticity, there's a certain amount of longevity that goes along with it, but I think being genuine shines through, and a lot of how I've gained traction has been through interviews and man on the street. And when you're podcasting or you're doing content from your apartment, you can kind of fake it in a way. But when you're out talking to people and when you're interacting with others, it's a really good window into how you treat other people. And I think that's been a huge part of what shined through my content for my audience and how they perceive me to be authentic and genuine.
Yeah, I also think about it. You mentioned longevity, and for someone who's maybe starting out in content or thinking about doing content, I advise you to actually sit down and think if you're not bringing your true authentic self to your content, just think about how hard it is to try and be somebody else for an extended period of time. And content itself is already very difficult. I mean, you know better than anyone else. Growing a presence online, being consistent, like these are all very difficult things to grapple with and to actually execute on. And so if you layer on top of that the fact that you're trying to be someone else, it just makes it that much more difficult. And the story that I always say is when I was first starting out this podcast, there's certain podcasters I love listening to, like a Chris Williamson, even a Joe Rogan with specific
Yep.
guests, Stephen Bartlett, like all of like the big name podcasters. And when I was starting this out, I was like, okay, I want to do, I want to be like Chris, or I want to be like Stephen, or, I want to emulate these things that they're doing. And what I quickly realized is like, I will never be Chris Williamson. I will never be Stephen Bartlett. And also on top of that, it's also very exhausting to try and be those guys because I'm not. And we have very different interests. Like I'm much more interested in sports. Chris perhaps isn't. Like that's already a key difference. He talks in a very different manner than I do. He uses different words than I do. So it's just very difficult to try and be someone else. And that's what I quickly found out. And like, even if you go back to some of my first podcast episodes, you'll notice like I was trying so hard to like ask these like deep, thoughtful questions. And like, and yes, I do like the thought provoking questions, but I was like, you know what? like, I don't think I can do this full time. Like, I'm not going to survive in this world of podcasting if I'm just trying to be someone else. So that was a huge unlock for me. Is like, all right, let's go back to the drawing board and figure out what Nick actually likes to talk about, and then we'll bring our true, authentic self to the actual podcast.
Yeah, I think it's a process of learning about yourself. Like, I think I learned a lot more about myself over the last couple years and now than when I first started doing content. It's hard to take a deep look at yourself and look in the mirror and be like, what are the best qualities about me? What are things that aren't my strengths? When I started doing content, I was in much more of like a rapid fire sports take audience, which is really fun. And I still do a lot of it. But what I realized with doing interviews was that the thing that maybe sets me apart, or at least from what the audience is responding to, and whether it's my personal life or professional life, is I make people comfortable and uh, I get them to say what's on their mind and feel like they can be relaxed and be themselves. So that's something I really learned a lot more about myself over the last couple years, and I changed my content to fit that. And whether it's interviewing sports fans or interviewing athletes, I don't know just about anyone before I talk to them on camera. But you can't really tell that. And that's something I didn't really know when I started doing content. So it's not just about being authentic in yourself, but you learn about yourself as you do this, and not just, and it's partially how well things do, which it sucks that it's like, well, this got this number of views, so I guess I'm this, opposed to this didn't get this number of views, so I'm not that. And that kind of does suck. But you take bits and pieces of what you enjoyed, what performs well, what drove comments, what you've gotten good reaction from your family and friends about, and it shapes the way that the kind of content you do, the kind of content you enjoy.
Let me ask you this. I don't know if you've read this article. I'm going to send it to you afterwards if you haven't, because it was so good. But it's called Audience Capture, and I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote it for the life of me. So I apologize. But essentially, the premise of the article is when you start creating content, you start getting feedback on your content in with views, with likes, with comments, with engagement. And what sometimes happens to creators is they'll put out a certain piece of content, it'll get a lot of engagement, and then they'll say, "Okay, this is the content that works. This is the content that I'm going to continue to push out." The problem is you start getting down a path where your content ends up becoming more and more extreme, because the more extreme the content is, the more engagement you get, the more views you get. So I don't know if you remember, what was his name? That creator on TikTok, was it Nick Avocado or something like that? I'm probably butchering his name, but
Okay.
he started off doing like these food reviews, and he would just eat, like he would have like a McDonald's meal or something. And eventually it got to the point where he became, I mean, super fat, to be honest. And he was just like sitting on the floor with massive amounts of pizza and McDonald's and doing these like crazy eating challenges. But that is like an example of audience capture, to where like he started doing it, his audience wanted more and they wanted crazier things. And now all of a sudden he's doing these absolutely insane challenges, and he's, I mean, gained a lot of weight, and honestly probably didn't end up, becoming the best version of himself. So like, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you balance, okay, this is the content that gets views and that I've gotten good feedback on, but is this actually the route that I want to go down with my content? Like, do I want to keep following that path?
I think it's finding a balance. For me, sports have been my bread and butter, right? That's how I've gotten my start. That's what I always wanted to do. As I've done more content, and there's really been two sides, more of the sports analyst, columnist, opinion guy, particularly New York sports. And then there's more the hosting side, which is what I do for Yes Network or hosting podcasts. I did a lot of that for Overtime when I worked at Overtime, and thinking, okay, on the hosting side, there is some opportunity to do non-sports. And I have done that. When I worked at Overtime, I had a dating podcast with Overtime Megan, and that was something that was totally different than my content, but it was still a similar type of tone, but just a different topic. And I think that's been really the main difference where it's how can I keep being myself? It's not a more extreme version. It's just also talking about things that aren't just sports. Ryan Russillo has always been an inspiration to me. And I love that you tune into Ryan Russillo for his takes on sports and what he can offer from any different sport. But then at the end of the episode, he has a segment called Life Advice. And that to me is a really special segment. And I love that. So I think that's kind of the goal where they go hand in hand, where if you can introduce your audience to things that aren't only about one thing, that helps you grow everywhere. But I don't feel like I become a more extreme version of myself or when I started doing content. I've definitely gotten more comfortable. But even when I've had a bigger platform, it's just way easier to be yourself and not feel like you're being a character. And there are times where I have felt like I have gone too far with it. And I'll look back on it and be like, that's just, that doesn't feel like me. And I'll try to, you know, bury that on the internet. But, for me, it's not changing who I am or being a more extreme version. It's just also talking about things that can show the audience more about who I am and what I stand for.
What's your opinion on just the topic of picking a niche? Because I've heard so many different words of advice on this. Some people say you need to pick a very specific niche and stick to it. Others will say, well, your niche is you, like whatever your interests are and your personality. So, like, where do you stand on, I guess, those two opposing sides of the spectrum?
It's a great question because I have a strong opinion on it and I contradict my own answer. I think it's really important to have a niche and it's a growth hack. And for me, that's not what I've done. My niche has been broad where it's sports. I've tried to narrow it a little bit where from talking about sports side, it's more New York and I'm from New York and I live in New York and New York is the biggest market in the country when you're talking about regionally. When I think about a lot of my friends who do content and where they've found success, it's a growth hack to be known for one thing. I'm friends with Babita Tailgate. They do trivia. They strictly do trivia. Kate Maniscalco is a friend of mine. She only does baseball. Uh, Johnny Lazarus, he's a hockey guy. He only does hockey. And I think that's a smart way of doing it. A makeshift project. Those are close buddies of mine. They do rankings and it's podcasts. And you go to their page and you see their grid, and every video is going to be just about the same. And I say that as a good thing because the audience knows what to expect. For me personally, I have a lot of different interests. I'm extremely ADD. I like to flow with the sports calendar. This time of year, I'm not thinking about the Yankees that much. Maybe if they do something, but the Giants season's over. I'm watching Knicks right now. I'm watching the Rangers who are about to go through a rebuild. I like to flow with the sports calendar. Maybe I'm talking about sports right now. Maybe I'm doing an interview now. You could ask 10 people who follow me why they follow me, and you might get 7 or 8 different answers. So it's been great in terms of running a business because there's no off season and I can cover any event. I can cover any sport. I could interview anyone. I'm knowledgeable about it. I'm flexible. I've hosted broadcast content. I'm open for business and it's a good business model. From a growth perspective on social, I think it probably would have been wiser to be a little bit more narrow from a content approach. So, when I think about growing social pages, I think being even more niche than I am would have been better.
It's interesting that you say that if you ask 10 of your followers why they follow you. I've actually never thought about that question or even framing it in that way. So I'm glad you brought that up. But you mentioned if you ask 10 of your followers, why do you follow Alex, you might get a different answer from each one of them. This is a question that I've been thinking a lot about. How do you make sure that you continue to provide value to the people who have followed you or they have been a loyal supporter? or just, they just watch your content? Like, how do you continue to make sure that you provide that value to people, especially someone like you who, I mean, you've admitted you're a little bit more broad and you talk about a lot of different topics. So like, how do you think about that question?
I think about it a lot, and I go back and forth a lot. And I think sometimes when you're feeling down on yourself, you can question that. And when you're feeling good about yourself, it becomes a lot more crystal clear and you realize the answer somewhere in between. I think an important part of that answer is the fact that I've really, especially on Instagram, carved out a niche of doing a lot of New York sports. And I'll look at my demographic, and it's not as big of a percentage of people who live in New York that follow me as you would think. And my biggest takeaway from that is if it's important to you, it's important to me. And people want to see people who are passionate about something. People want to see people who are genuine about it. And the way I'm passionate about the content I do shines through, and it makes people who aren't Yankees fans care about it. If you're a Yankees fan, you're going to care about it. If you're not a Yankees fan, you now know what it feels like to be on the ride of every October. You're living and dying with every pitch, and you know the feelings. So I think that's one way of providing value, definitely from a New York sports perspective. And then on when I think of more the hosting side, that's something that's super saturated and it's super competitive. If you have a iPhone, I use an iPhone and a mini mic. Anyone could do that right now if they wanted to. And when I started doing this, I didn't have any access. I have much more access now than I did then, but um there was no shortcut to it. And for me, the value I can provide is really thinking of a good segments and platforms of presenting entertaining content. And number two is I think the value I could provide is that, this goes back to the question of, figuring out the type of content you're good at. And I said, like, I make people comfortable. So it's a good, but I think another part of it that I realized is I watch a lot of people do man on the street and it's not very conversational. It's either trivia
Mhm.
or it's a question and it's on to the next question. And for me, I only go into it with like one or two questions and then I've got follow-up questions. So, you feel like you're just sitting in on someone else's conversation. These are all things I think about a lot and I don't really have a firm answer to, but look, if you want to be great, you have to do great. So sometimes you got to take a step back and be like, is this good or is it great? Is are you just doing it or is it you're doing it to be great? So these are all things I think about, and I try to remember that if you're not passionate about it, the audience can tell.
I heard a quote somebody once said, "Don't half-ass it, full-ass it." And I think that's just my, like, going in
Absolutely.
mantra. Like, that's just like, Imma get that printed out and, like, taped on my wall.
Absolutely. And the results will follow. And there'll be times when I know things are going to be slower than other times. Like I know, holidays or yeah, November or January. Like this is a little bit of a slower time of year for me when I think of when I do more of my interviews or, playoff runs always help during New York sports. So, I'm about to cover the Super Bowl and then it'll be NFL draft and March Madness and baseball season starts and Knicks playoffs. And like, you know, in May last year, I felt like I was on top of the world. I came off a great spring and the Knicks were in the playoffs and I'm doing crazy numbers, and then things naturally, slow down during different types of years. So if you can try to keep that same mindset all year round, I'm totally with you on that, Nick. Full ass, no
Full
half
ass.
ass.
Exactly. Well, Alex, I was gonna say, normally January could be a hot month for you if the Giants ever decided to make the playoffs, but recently that has not been the case. So that's maybe why January has typically been a slow month for you. Sorry, I had to get
Yeah.
a Giants joke in there, man. Come on.
No, of course. I mean, everyone makes a giant. If you're not making a Giants joke, then you're not a football fan.
I did want to ask you. how did you how did you define success when you first started out with content, and how do you define it now? I'm interested to hear what that delta is, if there even is one, because I think people, when they normally start a project like content creation, like a company perhaps, they have this vision of what they want the company to be, what they want their content to be. But what I've realized is a lot of times that changes, and it changes quite drastically as you continue to, take action and iterate and move along. So I'm interested to hear what changed in your definition of success since when you started and present day.
It's a tough question because I think that's something I struggle with now, where if you told me when I started doing content where I would be in 2 years after that, I would have taken that, but I didn't feel like that. And at that point, if you told me where I would be in 2 years after that, I really started doing content in 2020, I would have taken that, but I don't feel like that. So it's hard to say. I've had different goals. Some of it has been in writing, some of it hasn't. When I started doing content, the goal was, can I build enough of an audience to have my own no, sorry. Can I build enough of my audience to get picked up by a company and make doing content a job? And that was a benchmark for me. And I started doing content summer 2020. I started working for Overtime summer 2021. And that felt like a huge achievement to me. And it was. When I was with Overtime, I was there for 3 years. And at a certain point in that journey, the goal became, can I do this content well enough where I can leave Overtime and run my own shop? And I did that. And almost 3 years to the day of starting, I left Overtime in summer 2024. And that felt like a big step to me. It, I think when I left, the goal was not just financially making it work. I think that's a huge part of it, but it's hard to say from a growth side. It has been a success. I left Overtime about a year and a half ago, and if you told me that this year and a half would be like what it's been, I would take that in a heartbeat. Sitting here today, I feel that in some ways, but if anything, feel more pressure than I feel like I had even then, because, if you're talking about, I mean, I've been doing this for a couple years, since 2020, but 2025 was my first full calendar year being independent. I had a great year. Can you do it again? Was it a fluke? Like, I kind of feel now there's more eyeballs watching. So if you want to try something new, it you can't just experiment with no one watching the same way when I first started doing content. So I struggle with that question a lot because I think it's pretty easy to get down on yourself in doing this. It's an extremely, when you talk about instant gratification or instant dejection, it's really easy to lose the big picture. So, I try to, my way of viewing success is like looking back in the past and being like, okay, would I have been happy with where I am now if you told me this then, opposed to asking myself today, well, I'm not sure if I'll ever feel like that.
You mentioned you had a stint in your content creation journey where you talked about dating with Overtime Megan. And I think I've seen a couple clips from the show that you guys used to do. And the reason I bring that up is because I think the question or the statement that I'm about to say ties in both your experience with dating, or I should say dating as a topic, and then also content creation. And the question is, how much of content creation, how much of dating, how much of life is just not rejecting yourself?
I think it's a huge part of it, right? I think if you're not going to believe in what you're doing, then it's going to be hard to convince someone else or an audience to believe in it as well. When I started doing content, this is what I had in mind, This is what the goal was. So, yeah, I absolutely believed in myself, and I've always been confident with that belief, because I just think I'm very big in the power of positive thinking. And it's funny because I'm a New York sports fan, and so much of my audience knows me for bitching and moaning about my New York sports teams, which they've given us plenty of reason to. But I am a very positive person, and um, I don't want me saying it's hard to quantify success in such a instant gratification or instant dejection business as me not being positive about it, because I am extremely positive. And you know, I started doing content in 2020. For the first 6 months, I was doing no views, and I still believed I could get this thing going. And in January 2021, I had 400 followers, and I got a video that hit 500,000 views, and the rest is history. So I've always believed in what this has turned into, I think, well before it even got off the mat.
Help me understand that positive mindset and that belief that you had even if you weren't seeing results.
Yeah, I think that it, I just fully believe, like, if you are positive about something, you can manifest it. And it's not going to be instant, it's not going to be always, but before I started doing content, I graduated college in 2016. From 2016 to 2020, I was a producer, I was a shooter, I was an editor, I was behind the scenes. I went to college for broadcast, but I was on the other side of the camera. And I used to work for the Yankees, which was amazing. And hey, I'm at a place where I want to be. I'm not doing what I want to be doing. Um, but even back then, I would get on my boss about, hey, I've got this idea. I don't want to just produce it. I want to host it. And he's still a good buddy of mine today, but he'll talk about how annoying I was during those times where I believed in what I'm doing now, even before I started doing content, and I was a cameraman. And there was a series called In the Moment that I came up with, and it was an interview series with athletes. And I came up with it. He loved it. I said I wanted to host it. He said no. On the fourth time, he let me do it. And I got to interview CC Sabathia and break down in like an 8-minute YouTube video his 3,000 strikeout. And it was an amazing moment for me. It was my first time doing on air post graduation. It was like 3 years since the last time I did. That series got nominated for an Emmy, and I was the cameraman. I didn't win, but it was cool that I got nominated. And I believed in it. I believed in it. So, you know, I, it's this constant contradiction of being super confident in your abilities and thinking you could do it before you can do it, while also feeling like you're still always in, the first 3 innings of the baseball game, and you're still nowhere at the same time. So it's a contradiction, but I also kind of like that because it keeps your confidence and your positivity, but also your edge and being scared that, hey, at any given day, this could go away, or there's so many people doing it. There'll be someone who comes after for sure, but like there's always competition. So there's definitely a certain amount of fear that comes with it too. But I think that's healthy.
Yeah, I also think, I mean, so having played sports growing up and now watching sports for as much as I do, which is essentially every day, all day, anytime I have any free time, but I'm sure you're probably the same way. One thing that I've really come to appreciate with sports, either playing it or watching it, is this notion that there is competition and that competition is actually, in fact, healthy, like you just mentioned. Like one of the things, like I grew up playing water polo. I played water polo in high school. And I'll never forget, I actually told this story in the last podcast I did. There'd be numerous times we'd go to this tournament and, I grew up in the Bay Area. So like Stanford and Berkeley, I mean, they had the best water polo teams, like the best club teams in the entire region. And we would go up there, play them, and we'd just get our asses beat. Like I'm talking 17-0, 16-1, just like absolute humiliation. And I remember in that moment, like thinking, dang, like that kind of sucked. And then our coach would come up to us and he'd be like, well, boys, like that was terrible. But you basically have two options. You can either sit there and bitch and moan and say, well, the world isn't fair. Someone's better than me. This team's better than me. Or you can sit there and you can ask yourself, how am I going to become better? how am I going to become the best version of myself so I can go out there and I can actually compete with these guys and prove not only to myself but to them that, you know what, I do belong here and I can play on their level. And that's just one lesson that I think applies to anything you do in life. Like, yes, there may be people who are better at podcasting than I am. Maybe they ask better questions. Maybe they're better at, they're better conversationalists. Like, absolutely, those people exist. But I can sit here and I can be like, you know what, that sucks, and then just not do anything about it. Or I can be like, you know what, let me maybe try and learn from them. Let me pick up on some of the things that they're doing. Let me see how I can better myself, become the best version of myself to actually go out and compete with them. So that's why I like the fact that you brought up competition and fear, and why ultimately I think it's a good thing, because if there is no competition, more likely than not, you're going to end up stagnating and you're not going to continuously improve yourself and become a better version of who you already are. So that's why I just think competition, it's scary, but also it depends on the way that you frame it. And if you frame it in a certain manner, I think it can be your biggest advantage.
Absolutely. I think fear, while it's uncomfortable because it's not a great feeling, it forces you to work, or at least forces me to work in a certain way that feels fail proof. You know, like being scared of one day not being able to do this for a living, and that makes me work really hard because I don't want to lose it or feel like I'm losing momentum, and I fully believe in the power of momentum, and uh I think that's a good thing. That I work so hard that I feel like it can't fail. It sounds crazy to say, um, but it isn't always true when you're getting up off the mat, because when you're getting up off the mat, you're trying to make things work. You have to be creative. Once you're up off the mat, it's easy to be comfortable. It's easy to be stagnant, coast, and I don't think that this is the type of industry where you can do that. The internet does not go to sleep. The internet is not off on holidays. The internet is reacting to that buzzer beater at midnight on the West Coast basketball game. You know, there's the news cycle, and there's a lot of people doing this. So, um, yeah, you I think you can get a pretty good sense of the constant panic and feeling like a duck. You say you're like a duck. You're coasting along the water, and you're scratching and clawing under the water, and you're just like water polo. So that's very much me, and to me that feels fail proof.
How do you keep your mental sanity?
I don't know. I love to travel. I think for me, New York is a place that fits my personality really well. Doesn't help with my mental sanity, and there'll be a couple times a year where I'll work from somewhere that is so far removed from New York, and I can get out of that rat race a little bit, and I can, for me, like let me give you an example of a great mental a great place where I could calm my mental sanity was in September. I went to San Diego for a week, and for me, it was perfect because I would work in the mornings for about 3 hours. If I'm not doing some version of work every day, that's not fun for me either. If I'm only working, then you're losing your mental sanity. So for me, it was beautiful because you're out of the rat race. I'd wake up early. I would work for 3 or 4 hours. I'd go to the beach the rest of the day. That to me, that's a beautiful day. You don't feel the pressure of everyone is trying to beat the next person. You're working, and you're also being able to relax. So for me, my mental sanity is being able to, I kind of joke like every single day is somewhat the same for me, where I'm working every single day, but maybe I'm not putting in, on a weekend, I'm not putting in a full work day, but like I'm doing a little bit every single day. And for me, that's a good balance of, fun and play. Fun and work.
Yeah. I ask because, I mean, what we've talked about so far, especially within the content game and especially if you're within sports, like you said, the news cycle doesn't stop on the holidays. Christmas, there's games every single day of the week. There's something happening. And so if you actually want to stay on top of it, I mean, you just have to be, you essentially have to be dialed in 24/7 because you never know when something will break. I'll never forget, if you remember last year when the whole Luka trade broke, um, it was actually on my birthday. So February 2nd, which is pretty
There you
funny,
go.
but I was like out with my friends and it was like midnight and I see the tweet and it's like, oh, Luka's been traded. And then of course you get like all the people saying, oh, it's fake, he got hacked, whatever. And I was like, no, actually, like this actually happened. So like that's an example of maybe you're getting ready to go to sleep and it's like, oh, here's, arguably the biggest NBA news story of the year that is breaking at midnight, 1 a.m. and you have to get up and film a video or if that's the type of content you're doing, like do a reaction. Like it
This
just
week,
is what it
John
is.
Harbaugh got hired at that news broke at midnight.
Right.
I had just gotten into bed. I took my contacts out and I came outside in my living room and ripped a reaction video with my glasses on and just a squinty eyed, tired video. Hey, I cover the Giants. Get up out of bed. Trust me, you didn't have to twist my arm. I think I think the important part about a lot of because these have been such great questions, and I think I'm so thankful I'm in the position I'm in, and I work really hard to get there, and it's stressful, but I would do it all again. And Nick, I love this shit, man. I love this
Yeah.
shit. It's the most fun, and I feel like it's a privilege. And everyone has their stressors with their work, and I think for me, I'm okay with mine. Not only knowing what's on the other side, but feeling like I'm doing it for myself, and it feels that much more gratifying not doing it for an employer as much anymore.
Right. There's that quote that I'm going to butcher, but essentially it says, "Don't complain about the work you once asked for or you once wished for."
Correct.
And like
Correct.
that's I always come back to that. Like if you like you wanted this life at one point, like when you
Yeah,
sat there and you said, "You know what would be awesome? It'd be awesome to cover the New York Giants. Like I'd love to cover the
totally.
Knicks."
Where do
And
I
like
sign?
exactly. And now you're doing it. And guess what? If the John Harbaugh news breaks at midnight or 1 a.m., then
Yeah,
god damn it, you got
I'll
to
get up
get
out
out
of
of
bed.
bed. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
that's that it's funny how many people like want a certain type of life or they want to it doesn't even have to be content, like anything really. And then when they start to realize like, oh, like this is the work that's required, or oh, I have to go do this. It's like what you were expecting it to be easy. Like you were just expecting someone to snap their fingers and all of a sudden you are a influencer or you are, the go-to man for New York sports. Like it doesn't happen in that way. And I think it's I don't want to get too deep here, but I do think it's more of a societal issue where, you had brought up this idea of instant gratification earlier in the podcast where everything is instant. Like we expect everything to happen overnight. You open your phone, you get an instant dopamine hit, you get your TikTok video, you get your Instagram reel, and I think we've just been trained to think in short term spurts where it's, okay, how can I become an influencer in 2 weeks instead of what's my 5 year plan? Like, look at you sitting here in front of me, right? Like you started content in 2020. So 2020, it's now 2026. So coming up on 6 years that you've been doing this, like if back in 2020, you had asked yourself like, all right, how can I do all this in 2 weeks? I guarantee you wouldn't be in this position that you are now because
Nick.
short-term thinking never leads to long-term results.
So once you started saying that, I actually looked up at my at the time and date on the computer, and today on January 19th is the 5 year anniversary of my first viral video. I didn't even realize until you said it, and that doesn't include the time it took before the first viral video. So I think that should give context if you're someone who's watching and you're trying to figure it out. And it's also a good reminder for myself where, I started this new show at the end of 2025 called The Daily Show, a play on the Jon Stewart Daily Show, but Dayly. It's a YouTube show, it's an interview show, and it's not just sports. So it's, kind of at your point earlier, stepping out a little bit, but it's longer form content. It's not just sports. And it's done okay. I think it's actually really good, but it's done okay. And it's a new platform for me and not totally in my arena. And, it's been frustrating. I've got this certain benchmark for myself where if I post something, I know it could get this kind of traction. You're kind of starting over, and I want that instant gratification. And I put money and time into this, and it hurts when there's not that instant gratification. And look, is hearing what you say and looking at the date and being like, my first viral video was 5 years ago, and it's been a journey since then. So there's nothing overnight about anything. There's definitely nothing overnight about this.
I was reminded, so Mark Manson, the author who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, I'm sure a lot of people have read it or at least seen the book, but New York Times bestseller, I think one of the best-selling nonfiction books of all time. And I had not heard of Mark before I saw that book. Like, I had no idea who he was, wasn't familiar with any of his old work. And I saw him appear on a podcast when the book kind of first came out. And I was like, oh, let me listen to this. I don't know who this Mark guy is, but I read his book and the book was really good. Obviously, it was a bestseller. And I remember during the podcast, somebody, I believe the host had asked him, like, how does it feel to be this like overnight success? Like you're essentially go from a nobody and now you have this bestseller. And he was like, oh, like I've been writing blogs for like 15, 20 years that nobody ever read. Like I've been writing on the internet for 15 years, was not on anyone's radar, didn't go viral. What I was just writing for 15 years. And now I'm in this position. And so when people say like, oh, Mark, you're an overnight success, it's like, no, buddy. Like I've been doing this for 15 years. I put in the work for 15 years to be in a position to where I could release this book and have it be this amazing thing. And now everyone knows my name. So kind of ties into what you were saying too, with the work that you've been doing. Even think about your own journey. Like you were the behind the scenes guy for how many years, like learning content, learning probably camera angles, learning all these different things that are now contributing to what you're doing in the present with your new YouTube show and
Big
even the
time.
content that you continue to put out. So I'll just end it here because I'd love to get your reaction as well. Steve Jobs had this, so I think it's pretty famous now. He did a commencement speech at Stanford, I believe. And he had this thing in there where he talked about connecting the dots and how when he was going through college, he took this calligraphy course. And at the time, he didn't really know why he took it. He just kind of took it because he was interested in it. And looking back on it, he was like, wow, am I glad I took that course, because it taught me, the beauty of font and how to make a beautiful font and how to create these beautiful designs. And all that contributed to me. Like I took all that knowledge and I applied it to Apple to create these beautiful machines and beautiful fonts. And Apple is obviously what it is now, $1 trillion company. And he was like, looking back on it, I connected the dots and I said, oh, I took this course. It led me to learning this thing that I then used here. And now all of it makes sense. I'm this big successful person. And so that's when I think about your own journey as well. It's like, oh, I was a broadcasting major. I learned certain things there. And then I took that and I applied it to the behind the scenes work that I did. And then I learned camera angles and now I'm applying it to my, like, when you look back, it's easy to connect the dots, but in the moment, it's almost impossible.
1000%. 1000%. When I went to college, I learned so many of the fundamentals. I feel like I really learned the art of storytelling, the art of interviewing, how to ask good questions, what makes a good lead. And of course, when I graduated in 2016, there wasn't digital media in the same way, but I think a lot of those principles were applicable to this. And I really didn't know much about production when I went into production post grad. It was just a way in, and I had some tough bosses who made me good editors. I hated editing, and I hated editing. Uh, Setting up interview shots, producing, writing, all these things that were not what I wanted to be doing. What I wanted to be doing is what I'm doing now, but I was learning everything else that supported that. So then by the time I started working at Overtime and I'd gotten my feet under me doing content, and probably around 2022, 2023, Overtime starts doing a little bit more traditional media with their leagues. They have Overtime Elite and their Football League OT7. They need a play-by-play guy. I went to broadcast school. they're doing hosting for branded content. I have been a host on the traditional media side along with the content side. I still edit, especially on the interview side. Most of my short form content, I still do the editing for that because I knew how to do that before. When it comes to the daily show, the interview show, I'm pretty hands on with my production team on what I want that shot to look like, and these are the type of transition shots I looked for. So it was really tough to appreciate that in 2017 and 2018. I was making like $33,000 a year, and it sucked. But that part sucked. But I was thankful for the opportunity. But it's much easier to look back on it now and appreciate the foundation that built. I think that's really given me a leg up in many ways, where because I haven't been an overnight success. Yeah, of course you need one thing to get you up off the map, but not like an overnight success where I've been able to do so much of this as like a one man band that it's all come together. I was a broadcast major in college. I was a business minor. Now I'm running my own business, and you should see the spreadsheets, brother. So it all comes together, and it was definitely hard to appreciate that now, and um, super thankful now that I had a lot of those experiences that didn't feel that way at the time.
I'll also say this may be a hot take, maybe it's not, maybe it's a lukewarm take, but I think people should actually be striving um, for the long-term success over the short instant gratification. And I'll give an example. When I first started the podcast, even now to this day, people used to ask me all the time, like, who's your dream guest? If you could have one athlete or one entrepreneur on, like, who would you want to have on? And my initial inclination was to say, uh, LeBron. Like, I'd love to interview LeBron one day and ask about his childhood and the way that he grew up and how that influenced his journey and his mindset. Like, I would just love to interview him, obviously. But then I sat back and I said, you know what? I actually don't want to interview LeBron right now. Like, if you told me tomorrow, like, hey Nick, you can interview LeBron, I'd be like, you know what? Like, I don't know that I could bring my full potential to that interview right now, because I don't think I have the practice. I don't think I have the knowledge that I may have in a year's worth of time that would make that interview 10 times better than if I were to do it today. So when I think about it, like, even being able to interview you, right? Like, if we did this interview a year ago, I think it would have gone a lot worse because I just simply I didn't have enough practice. I wasn't good enough at this craft, to be quite frank. And maybe I'm still not good at it. Who knows? But
No, this has
it's
been excellent. No, I'm serious. You ask really good questions, and really
awesome.
poignant and super impressive.
Okay, good. Well, thank you.
I mean that truly.
Thank you. But so my point is, like, I see that Michael Strahan jersey behind you. Like, I'd love to interview Michael, but like, maybe in this moment it's not the right time, and that's something that I think people need to realize, because people always chase the viral video, the viral moment. They want the 100K followers overnight. I don't think you actually want that, because you want to take your time and learn the craft. That's actually what's going to lead to long-term success, is you learning the craft, learning what works, learning what doesn't work. How many failures have you had? How many videos have you posted, Alex, where nobody watched? It was a complete dud. But guess what? You looked at it now and you're probably like, I wonder why this failed. Like, why? Like, okay, what could I have done better? What could I But if you have the instant overnight success, you don't get those opportunities to learn. You just you don't. And so, yes, you may get the viral video, you may get the 100K followers, but maybe in a year's worth of time, you're not going to have that sustained success.
100%. 100%. Don't get me wrong. Maybe I would have signed up for the 100K overnight. That doesn't sound too bad. And who am I kidding? But I think there's beauty in the other side too, where you can feel like you're building something sustainable, not just from a community, but also from learning and from growing and being better and more prepared and more professional. And being able to adapt more on the fly and being more prepared, and just a lot of the ways you said too. So I think there are definitely, if I had something that gains me another 100,000 followers overnight, yeah, I'll sign up for that too. But there's beauty in both.
Yeah, I also don't want to sound like an idiot. Like, obviously, if someone came to me and was like, "Hey, you can interview LeBron tomorrow," I'm not going to be like, "All right, give me a year." But like, I think the point remains the same. Like, you yourself
Absolutely.
need to know, like, are you ready or are you not ready? Like, do you have the necessary skills? Because there's certain. My dad always used to say this. And I'll never forget it. He used to tell me, like, every time, not every time, but like he would tell me before I went to go play a water polo game. He'd be like, "Listen, there's going to be an opportunity within this game. Like, you are going to have," like he used to say, like 5 minutes. Like, you have this 5 minute window of opportunity. Now it is up to you. Are you going to take advantage of that opportunity or are you not? And there's that quote that says, "Luck is preparation times opportunity." And my dad always used to tell me, you're going to have your 5 minutes of fame. What you do with that is ultimately up to you and essentially decides whether or not you have a good game or a bad game. And at the time, I was like, okay, classic dad trying to give me advice before a game, like whatever, brush it aside. Now I look back on it and it's like some of the most important advice that I could give to anyone. And so the whole point of like the LeBron thing is like you yourself need to know, am I prepared enough to go into this interview with LeBron? And if somebody were to come with that opportunity and I am prepared, well, now I can take advantage of it and create this like so-called luck that everyone seems to think just is pixie dust and is, comes around randomly. So you have your 5 minutes of fame. You need to take advantage of it.
I love it. I love it. You got me ready to run through a wall, Nick.
Let's go. Um, Alex, I do want to get to some New York
Yeah,
topics, sports topics here. And I think I have a couple fun questions for us to go
let's
through.
go.
Let's just rip the Band-Aid off and
Hmm.
get this one out of the way. So you are, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are a huge Giants, Knicks, Rangers, and Yankees fan.
That would be correct.
Okay.
Once proud.
If one of them had to relocate and you had to pick one of those teams to relocate, which one are you picking?
That's a brutal question. Oh man. Well, the Yankees, and I'll also say the Knicks, are the most quintessential New York. Like, no matter what other teams are good or bad, those two teams will matter to New Yorkers more than any. Don't get me wrong, Mets fans are diehard. You know how big of a Giants fan I am, how big of a Rangers fan. Uh, yeah, I think those two have to be off the table just in terms of New York. Between the Rangers and Knicks, I think you would. Sorry, between the Rangers and Giants, I think you would have to go Giants because not only do the Giants currently play in New Jersey, but the Rangers have some unfinished business. And when I say unfinished business, the Rangers have won their last Stanley Cup was 1994. Their last Stanley Cup before that was 1940. That is a crazy amount of ineptitude for an original 16. This would be a failure if the Rangers left now. Like, the Rangers have been a storied bad franchise. There aren't that many franchises. Like, you can maybe talk about the Cubs, but the Cubs were more known for their ineptitude until they won in 2016. The Rangers have been a bad franchise for pretty much their whole existence, and Rangers fans are diehard. So it would be tough for them to, it would sting being like their tenure in New York was a failure.
Do you feel though that if you relocated the Giants, you could say the same? Although the Giants did win 2 Super Bowls and um, did ruin the Patriots' perfect season. So, because I was going to
Absolutely.
ask you, like, do you
Giants have
think if
won.
you relocate the Giants, like, is it a failure, like for them, like for being in New York for all the time that they have?
Maybe, but the Giants have won 4 Super Bowls in 35 years. It's been an unimaginably bad 15 years. Who
Right.
could have thought that they've won one playoff game since their Super Bowl win? But The Giants won 2 Super Bowls with one of the best defenses ever with Lawrence Taylor and Harry Carson and Carl Banks. And then they won 2 amazing Super Bowls against the Patriots with Eli Manning. That's a lifetime of memories right there, man. Those don't come around too often, and I've gotten to see 2 of them. So I guess I would have to go with my New York Football Giants.
I was about to say, you've seen more Super Bowls than I have, being a 49ers fan. And what's funny is I posted an Instagram reel the other day, which actually did surprisingly well. I didn't expect it to resonate, but I said that being a Niners fan born after 1995 is a top 3 worst experience when it comes to like rooting for NFL teams, because you hear about all the stories about how great we were winning all the Super Bowls that we did in the 80s and 90s. And then you've known nothing but like heartbreak since then, like the 2000s and the Jim Harbaugh era, the Kyle Shanahan era. Like it's been nothing but heartbreak. So I'm like, you know what?
The Mike
I think,
Singletary era.
oh, don't even remind me. The Jim Tom Sula
Can't win
experiment.
with them. Can't win with. Yeah.
Yeah. The Chip Kelly. Oh my God. I remember the years we had Chip Kelly. That was rough. Colin Kaepernick's
Bad.
last years.
I
It's
mean,
bad, man.
here's an example. How many years did Eli Manning win a playoff game other than the 2 Super Bowl runs?
How many years did Eli Manning win a playoff game? I'm going to say 1.
0.
Really?
So since the Giants' first Eli Super Bowl in 2007, there's only been one other season where they have won a playoff game that they have not won the Super Bowl. That was the Daniel Jones Vikings win in 2022. A little all or nothing.
Yeah, wow. I didn't realize that. So how do you let's brainstorm here. Like, how do you fix the Giants? What's the issue with the
They
Giants?
just did a huge step in fixing the Giants. Giants lack stability. There's no way that all these head coaches the Giants have had, granted they've been first-time head coaches, have been bad. The constant has been the front office, not just talking about the general manager, but talking about a lot of their scouting departments, player personnel. A lot of that is in the family, the ownership family. Talking about people who are related to ownership, talking about people getting promotions during these past 10, 15 years, despite the organization being in bottom 3 wins in the last 10, 15 years. When you bring in a guy like John Harbaugh, that not only changes the culture, but changes the way that you do things. And I like that it took them an extra 3 days to iron out the contract before he signed, where he said, we're doing it my way. No more of how you've been doing it. We're doing it my way, and we're changing it from the top down. He now reports to the owner. He's not reporting to the GM. So that type of turnover is a big first step. When you talk about how to build good football teams, you talk about the coach, you talk about the quarterback, you talk about having a wide receiver 1, talking about having a franchise left tackle, talk about having some pass rushers. The Giants have all that, which is crazy to say. I don't think they have a very good GM. And a lot of the defense, which should be good on paper, just had a historically bad season. So the defense is confusing. Getting John Harbaugh cannot be understated. What a big deal that is, though.
You know how like every year there's a team that usually goes from worst to first in the division? The Patriots just did it this year. I think the Giants.
Washington the year before.
Yeah, I think the Giants for me are that team next year. You talk about John Harbaugh, like you just mentioned. You talk about all the pieces that you have. Like the pieces are there, especially on defense. I mean, offense. I I think you have a quarterback. I don't know what your thoughts are on Jackson Dart. I think he's the guy, but if he could just stay healthy and not get knocked out every other game. So I think the
Well,
pieces are there.
I think you hit the nail on the head. They do have a quarterback, and Dart is. He, in my opinion, it might be too early. He is a franchise quarterback, but if he doesn't take care of himself, the best ability is availability, and we need him on the field.
I just had Luke McCown on the pod. For those who don't remember
Nice.
Luke, he was actually a really good interview. He's awesome. He played 13 seasons in the NFL. Maybe people remember him most as being the backup for Drew Brees and the Saints. He told me that he played for 5 different NFL teams. So I think he has a pretty good idea of what he's talking about. He said that there are 2 types of franchises in the NFL. those who care about winning, and you see that from day one. You walk into the building and you immediately see the culture. You understand what they're all about. They're all about winning, about process, about the day-to-day operations. And then you have the other side, which are franchises who just sell hope and tickets to fans every year. And they don't necessarily care about winning. They care just about like, hey, we got this guy, it might be good, selling hope and selling tickets to their fans. Where do you think the Giants rank out of those two options?
Oh, the Giants care about winning. It's not fake. I just think they can't get out of their own way. Like, I don't think it's for a lack of trying. You look at some other owners around sports, you know, Jerry Reinsdorf. Jerry Reinsdorf is fine with the Bulls being a play-in team every single year for the last 4 years, or the White Sox not really doing much. And, the Giants want to win. Absolutely. The Mara family is a proud family, and talk about Wellington Mara, the father who was the owner for decades. And, if you're a Mara, all you know is the Giants, and the Giants care, and the Giants spend. They just can't get out of their own way, and they're not doing it the correct way. So it's not for a lack of trying, but it's for a lack of execution.
I have another question for you here. Um, if you could be, and it could be past or present, one New York sports athlete, you just get to inherit their life, everything they've been through, everything they experienced. You can pick to live the life of one New York athlete. Who would it be?
It's not really close for me that it's Derek Jeter. That was, yeah, it's not close. I mean, talk about someone who won 5 World Series rings. Talk about someone who dated every single Hollywood bombshell in the 90s and 2000s. I mean, some of Mariah Carey's most sultry songs were about this guy. Talk about someone who didn't live in the social media era. Derek Jeter would have been maybe a little bit of a different persona off the field if he was in the social media era. Just being loved, you're known for being clutch, you're known for being a winner, you're known for doing it in New York, and you're known for your dating history. And now he has 3 or 4 daughters and does TV and is a family man. Yeah. Where do I sign?
It's not a bad option.
Absolutely.
So you're telling me it wouldn't be Eli Manning?
Love Eli. It's Jeter, and I don't know who's second.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't blame you. I mean, I see the logic is there. I agree with your logic. I'm also trying to think like if I could be one New York
Strahan,
athlete.
maybe Strahan.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you
I'm
also think about the success he's had post playing.
Yeah. Because it's tough because like to your point, Jeter has it all. Like he has the winning, he has the sports accolades, but then he also has the off the field. You would just love to live his life. Yeah, that's tough.
He has the
I
most
don't know.
hits in Yankees history.
Yeah.
And anytime, I love when someone says that Derek Jeter is overrated, because it just tells me I can't trust him.
So that brings up a good point. If you don't follow Nick Knows Ball, he's a great follow on Instagram, but he does all these. It's almost like a niche basketball page. Like that's what he has. So like he got really famous by posting these like selfies of him saying like, hey fellas, is it too early to bring up whatever, like a random like players highlights on the first day, like I could really go for like a side of French fries and I don't know, some like Amari Stoudemire 360 dunks or something
That's
like that.
my
Like,
favorite Nick.
is it really Amari Stoudemire?
Dude, Amari Stoudemire brought us back from the dead in the late 2000s. He was a great Nick, and it kills me that they didn't win more with him and Melo on the floor at the same time.
I was gonna say over Melo. Like he's your favorite Nick over Melo?
Melo won 2 playoff series.
Yeah.
A lot of that has nothing to do with Melo, right? Like Phil Jackson, bad front office, bad organization. But I like Melo, but I think, for instance, Brunson has passed Melo already as the greater Nick of all time.
That's tough.
Talk about winning, talk about making your teammates better. Don't get me wrong, I love Melo, but I just think he was a victim of a lot of ineptitude around him, but Melo also didn't make his teammates better. Melo didn't swing the rock. Melo didn't, you know, if you're going to play the way Melo played, you got to be able to carry your team to that level. And, 2013 was probably their best chance with Melo. There are some reasons that didn't work out, Jarrett Smith being one of them for sure. But yeah, I think if you're talking about all-time Knicks, I'm putting Brunson ahead of Melo.
So who's number one on that list then?
I think Patrick Ewing. I think, my Mount Rushmore of Knicks would probably be Patrick Ewing, Clyde Frazier, Jalen Brunson, and either Melo or Bernard King.
Okay.
It would be close.
It's crazy to think that Brunson would already be third all time. I'm not saying you're wrong. Like, I'm not disagreeing. It's just crazy to think. I guess also kind of goes to show like the lack of success the Knicks have had for like
The
long
bar is low,
periods of
man.
time. Yeah. Like, yeah, that's wild to think about. But also you have to think about like Melo 2012, 2013. I mean, the Heat were the team to beat in the East. So he was a little unlucky there too with the fact that, I mean, the Celtics, I guess the Celtics are kind of coming towards the end of their run. But yeah. So I think Melo only made one conference finals, right? It was when he was with the Nuggets.
Yep, never made conference finals with the Knicks. Yeah, it's tough sledding out here, man. Tough
Yeah.
sledding.
Tough sledding for New York sports. Alex, a couple more questions here to round us out.
Yep.
What, like, if you're talking to someone, let's say you and I are sitting in a bar and we're chit chatting, we're like 2 or 3 beers deep, having a good time, and I say a sports take or I give my opinion on a player, whatever it may be. What is one take or one opinion that someone could say where you're like, yeah, that guy doesn't know ball, or like that guy doesn't know what he's talking about?
I think other than the Derek Jeter being
Other than
overrated
the
one,
Derek Jeter, yeah.
um, I don't think there are too many of them. Well, that's not true. I think if I heard a lot, I would say that, but I would get more pleasure in calmly and succinctly proving them wrong than being like, "Oh, bro, you don't know ball." Like that's not fun for me. I hate those kind of conversations, but I feel like I know enough sports where I could prove you wrong on you could say any point and I could play devil's advocate to it. I do this thing at Fanatics Fest where I'll hold a sign and I'll say, "What's your hot take?" Fans can give me any sports hot take. Let's talk about it. And for me, it's a fun exercise of playing devil's advocate and just having a conversation and proving the other person wrong, even if I agree with them.
Do you have any of your favorite hot takes that people have given you, or any that you remember?
I mean, there was one that really pissed off people on the internet saying that Michael Jordan was overrated because he ran the triangle offense.
Oh,
Yeah, that was a pretty stupid take. That was a pretty stupid take. I mean, yeah, it just I instead of being like you're an idiot, I had fun saying, well, you know, he was a winner before the triangle offense and he won 3 with him and 3 without him and you know, the triangle offense hasn't worked for other people. It worked with the Bulls. It also worked with the Lakers. But we're talking about Michael Jordan here.
dude, one hot take that I used to have. This is actually when I was a lot younger. I didn't realize it was a hot take back then, but looking back on it, definitely is a hot take and honestly pretty dumb. I used to think that Phil Jackson wasn't that great of a head coach because he had Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and he had Kobe and Shaq. And I was like, oh, like anyone can coach these teams. Like you have, 4 of arguably the best players of all time on your teams. And then I read his book. I think it's called 11 Rings. And I started doing like more research about Phil and like actually listening to how people would talk about him. I'm like, oh, you know what made Phil great? The fact that he could manage all those personalities and get everyone on the same page and playing with each other. Like he actually,
The
I
Zen
mean,
master.
I'm not breaking any news here, but I was like, oh, that's probably why he's one of the best coaches of all time because he was able to get everyone. And the fact that he would give his players books, like he would, recommend like, hey, I think you should read this book based on maybe something that they're struggling with. Like Phil was great. I mean, obviously I was young and I'm a Sacramento Kings fan and the Lakers used to destroy us all the time. I was like, this
Yep.
Phil Jackson guy is overrated.
Was that '02 or '03?
'02, man.
'02. Yeah, that was '02.
'02, game 6, by the way, of the '02 Western Conference Finals.
Shady.
Definitely rigged. I have a conspiracy theory for you. I'm gonna tell you this theory. One last question, and we'll get out of here. So I don't know if people realize this, but NBC was in the final year of its contract with the NBA that year in 2002. So my conspiracy theory is that NBC was scared that they were going to get a Kings Nets NBA Finals. So they kind of gave a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and they're like, hey, we really need the Lakers for the ratings. And that's how we ended up with game 6 in what is clearly the most rigged NBA game of all time. I will
I
say,
don't think
though,
you're alone in that. I think
yeah,
that's a juicy one. Like, I think that has momentum.
I I think I'm gonna just start like I'm just post like 3 videos a day on it until it gets like some traction, until
I think you
until
should.
people wake up.
Yeah, absolutely.
um, Alex, one last question for you here, man. As we round out this interview, what's your opinion on the current state of sports media, and where do you think we're headed?
I think it's there will always be change, right? I think we've heard a lot of traditional media personalities really bitch and moan about new media, and I think that's wrong because there was once a time when the so-called traditional media was only print, and those, there's always going to be an evolution. With that being said, I don't love the hot take culture. I miss turning on ESPN and watching shows with, Merrill Hodge of talking about NFL film, or, you're watching things to better your understanding of sports and shape the next generation of sports fans to be educated, opposed to just having those conversations. And I think what was great about that era of sports media was that you could teach the audience enough that they could have those conversations instead of people who don't know as much as they should having those conversations. So it's very backwards in terms of the hot take opinion way of doing things. Um, but in terms of the podcasters, in terms of TikTok, in terms of Instagram and YouTube and new media and people like myself talking about it, that's evolution, baby. Like that's everything's gonna evolve. And there'll be some people who you don't think should have a microphone, and there's some people on ESPN and Fox and NBC that I don't think should have a microphone. But you can get some really good information from a lot of those sources that you're not getting from traditional media. And it's hard. I get it from the ESPN side. Hey, this gets ratings. Why are we going to stop doing that? I think in many ways we live in a very views driven world, and I get it. I mean, I live in that world too, but I don't know. Do people actually like it, or is it like or is it like a car crash that you can't turn away from it?
I do think so. One of and truthfully, I've recently discovered this. Like some of my favorite accounts to follow on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and YouTube. When it comes to the NFL or like the former quarterbacks or former coaches that like break down plays, and they'll be like Kurt Benkert is someone who does this. Chase Daniel is someone who does this as well. Well, they'll be like, oh, the Giants ran 4 verts here, and the receiver was actually supposed to do this, and the defense is playing a cover 2. Like learning the game in that manner with their personality I mean, it's some of my favorite content to consume. And I think they're also proving that there is an audience for that. And like you can generate views with that type of content. There is an appetite for that. I almost wonder if, back when First Take first started, like there's no real avenue for people to provide content, in terms of like a teaching style content, right? Like there didn't seem to be like a good avenue to do that. And First Take was kind of just what was on TV, and then it's lasted until now. And I'm not singling out First Take. There are definitely other debate type shows and hot take shows, but
No, it embodies everything though.
right. And so I almost wonder if like now that there's actual avenues of how people can distribute this content that is a little deeper and that does teach people about the game. I wonder if we're just going to continue to see that rise and some of the hot take stuff fall out.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, look, I am not of the belief that the loudest person is right.
Mhm.
You know, you could be entertaining without being loud. You could be witty. You could, Stuart Scott wasn't loud. You know, maybe Chris Berman's a little bit loud,
Yeah, I
but
was gonna say that's a
when
bad example.
when you look at what, if you're a company like ESPN, sure, people love ESPN because of the highlights, and now that's at everyone's fingertips. That's true. But when you also talk about the talent, you can be entertaining and not just be loud. And I think, Pat McAfee, for instance, gets put in that Stephen A. Smith bucket because he's loud. I find that show to be pretty interesting. Like, it's not just a hot take show. That's somewhat of a traditional media show. Or a lot of the Sports Center anchors I find to be a little bit vanilla, and they could be a lot more entertaining. Yeah, highlights are consumed differently, but it's about the people, and it'll always be about the people. So the hot take stuff I don't love. The new media stuff, that's just evolution.
Well, and also like to that point, I wonder how it's all gonna play out as TV viewership continues to, be on the decline, especially when it comes to, ESPN and some of these traditional media outlets, like you were mentioning. As podcasting has kind of taken over now, Netflix too. Like Netflix has,
Yep.
signed a bunch of the, part of my take. They signed a bunch of Barstool Sport. Bill Simmons is on Netflix now too.
Solo, yep.
Um, so it'll be interesting to see kind of how all that plays out. I think I'm all for the new media. I'm a little biased because I would say that I'm probably in that new media category if you want to put me in there. But I think it's exciting. I think it's going to just lead to, like we said at the beginning of this podcast, competition is a good thing. It leads to evolution and to new and exciting things. Alex,
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you,
thanks so
Nick.
much for coming on. This was awesome, man.
I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. You do a great job, and can't wait till the next time I'm on.
Awesome. No, I'd love to have you back on. We'll do a part two. Before we sign off, though, where can people find you and more of your work?
Yeah, follow me on Instagram on AlexDay7, TikTok AlexDay5. Someone got AlexDay7 before me. And then YouTube as well. It's Alex Day there, and you can check out my new show, The Daily Show, on YouTube there. So, whether it's Yes Network during baseball season or those socials, make sure to tap in.
Alex, thanks so much for coming on, man.
I appreciate it, Nick. Thank you.